Hi everybody, welcome to the channel at Dolls on Skates here on YouTube and also at Dolls on Skates over on Instagram. I am so excited because today I am sharing something that I have worked very hard on for quite a while, and that is a deep dive on Miss Addy Walker. I have worked on this deep dive for a full calendar year. I have over 50 pages written. I have over 50 references. I made a bibliography. It is in MLA format. So I have worked hard. I was basically the kid who gave themselves homework for no reason. And when I say basically was that kid, I mean I was that kid and I continue to be that kid. This is my very first deep dive on the channel. Usually I just kind of show my dolls, my products for my dolls, but I am very, very excited to go ahead and actually go into a deep dive on the world of Miss Addy Walker. Addy Walker is a character and doll devised by the brand American Girl. If you are not familiar, at the time of her release in September of 1993, American Girl was called Pleasant Company. Addy was the 5th doll in the line of characters, of historical characters, released by American Girl, but she was the first doll of color in the line. Her series is a 6-book series written by Connie Porter. Books 1 through 3 were illustrated by Melody Rosales, although there were some changes made that we're gonna get into, and so books 4 through 6 were illustrated by Bradford Brown. And then all 6 books were ultimately made more uniform by Doll Taylor, who really re-illustrated the books, and then he also did the illustrations for the short series, or the short stories, sorry, which are books that are outside of the main series of the first 6 books. Usually there's like a mystery, there's a few more books. I don't really cover the short stories in this video slash deep dive. I pretty much focus on the 6 books in the main series. So like I said, the series takes place over 6 books. Traditionally, American Girl historical characters were released with a 6-book collection. The first 3 books would be titled Meet X, in this case Meet Addy, X Learns a Lesson, and X's Surprise. The following 3 books would then be published and sold alongside more products in a later release, which would be Happy Birthday X, X Saves the Day, and Changes for X. So Addy was originally released, just like most of the main girls were originally released with their first 3 books, and then they would include their meet outfit or the outfit that they come in, the outfit or products that are related to their second and third book. The outfit that she is currently wearing is related to her second book, Addy Learns a Lesson. We will get into that a little bit more later. The first 7 historical characters released by Pleasant Company, including Addy, all follow this structure. While the following 3 historical characters, Rebecca, Julie, and Kaya, did follow the same 6-book arc, it did not follow the same naming conventions, although the first and the 6th books were still respectively titled Meet X and then Changes for X. Melody Rosales, like I mentioned, was the illustrator of the first 3 books in the versions that I own. Ms. Rosales modeled Addy after one of her daughters, and you can check out, sorry, I'm trying to find her, some of her illustrations of the actual characters, but here's the Meet Characters page. You can check out her website and Instagram for a little bit of behind the scenes photos. So for example, you can actually see a photo of her daughter posed as Addy in front of a gate, and obviously that photo ultimately became the cover for Meet Addy. Bradford Brown, who replaced Rosales on the illustrations for the remaining 3 books in the series, he made his illustrations notably less dark and dreary. The complexions of characters and dynamics in the imagery in some of the illustrations were also changed in the re-illustrations done by Mr. Doll Taylor. So I have all 6 books here. I'll kind of flip through to show illustrations probably as we go. While authors and illustrators were also changed for other characters in the American Girl line, Melody Rosales was removed from the Addy project on rocky terms. Authored by Aisha Harris, Slate published a 2016 article addressing Rosales' departure from the Addy project. And I cannot find any good pictures here. Oh, here we go. Rosales was referred to Pleasant Company by advisory board member Violet Harris, an expert in children's literature, particularly Black American children's literature. Purportedly, Rosales noticed upon her first meeting with Pleasant Company that, besides the Addy board, the staff were overwhelmingly white. Despite the presence of the series' all-Black advisory board, the tension grew, and Rosales described the disagreements with Rowland and the art team over her illustration style. Remember, Pleasant Rowland, if you are not familiar, is the founder of the American Girl Company. According to Aisha Harris in the Slate article, The Making of an American Girl, quote, "One such disagreement was over Rosales' depiction of the complexions of the Black characters, which portrayed the color caste system as it existed for Black people at the time. Addy's teacher, Miss Dunn, and her well-to-do rival and classmate Harriet, for instance, were illustrated as lighter-skinned." According to Rosales, Pleasant Company was afraid of wading into the complexities and politics of light and dark skin. But as you can see, Addy Walker does have a darker complexion compared to her well-to-do classmate, Harriet. As she did a few times throughout this experience, Rosales turned to Violet Harris for support, relaying disagreements. Harris would in turn advocate on Rosales' behalf, and the editorial team would come around. Of this particular issue, Harris said, "We both felt that it was crucial to have a range of physical appearances so that enslavement would not be associated solely with darker-skinned Blacks. We wanted to convey that light skin or biracial/multiracial heritage did not shield one from enslavement. Complexions are specified in the text as well, with Porter describing certain characters' skin as dark or light." At another point, according to Rosales, an art director complained to her that a particular illustration she'd done for a third book, Addy's Surprise, was sad. The illustration depicts a moment when Addy has gone with her mother to the pier on the Philadelphia waterfront to greet and assist the newly freed Blacks. And Addy gives her shawl to a weak, thin woman whose baby is crying and offers to carry the baby. Rosales says she was instructed to make the woman smile more. Porter had some recollections of sitting in on a meeting with the board and the Pleasant Company team when this issue arose, and she agreed with Rosales' fight against portraying happiness at such a heavy moment, as you can see here. "Joy might come in the morning, but it's not coming when you're tired and hungry and you've left behind family members," she told me, likening it to recent real-life images of refugees emerging from boats. Pleasant didn't mean ill, or even the art director. It's just that they're trying to tell the story in a certain way, and be careful about what they put out there for young readers. Eventually, said Rosales, an angry Rowland told her, "I'm not paying you to be a historian, I'm paying you to be a pair of hands." Ms. Rosales was then sent a termination letter, and she says she was asked by the company to return the Addy doll prototype they had given to her daughter, who had served as the model for Addy in the illustrations. Black illustrator Bradford Brown took on the final 3 books in the original series. Rosales spoke out about her firing to the press at least once in an October 1993 Chicago Tribune article about Addy. "This is a money venture," she told the paper. "This has nothing to do with being sensitive to the community." In the same article, Rowland called Rosales' accusations patently ridiculous. "My crime," Rosales concluded to Aisha Harris in an email, "was asking too many questions and challenging them to depart from making Black history part of their saccharine, sanitized collection of the perfect 9-year-old girlhood fantasy, a visual impossibility to illustrate an 1864 Blackhood reality." End quote. That article, that Slate article, The Making of an American Girl by Aisha Harris, is incredible. I would highly recommend checking it out. It is possible that Pleasant Rowland was engaging in implicit bias. Implicit bias is when a person is not being intentionally prejudiced, but she might not be culturally aware of a situation. So, for example, she might not understand why a Black character should look sad in a children's book, whereas the advisory board full of Black historians would say it is probable that a Black woman who is experiencing her very first day in freedom, while she's excited to be free, she is probably also completely exhausted by her journey to freedom. And therefore, she does not have a happy expression on her face. The American Psychological Association further defines implicit bias as an attitude of which one is not consciously aware against a specific social group. The phenomenon that perceptions, attitudes, and stereotypes can operate prior to conscious intention or endorsement. A person like Pleasant Company's founder, white Pleasant Rowland, though well-intentioned, may not recognize the benefit of including diverse complexions or facial expressions in the illustrations. Other disagreements during Addy's conception included debate over her hair texture and inclusion of the N-word in the books. It was seemingly important to Rowland, who expressed fear that the addition of a black character would be difficult to commercialize, to keep the brand marketable to a white audience. Rowland had initially intended to include a doll of color in the original release of the line, but she had decided against it because, as she told the Washington Post, I felt that the company initially needed to get established financially before we could take the risk that may be inherent in presenting a doll via direct mail into the African American market. Because typically middle-class black consumers do not purchase much from direct mail catalogs. It is because of this marketability that while Addy's hair is textured, Pleasant Company ensured hair that was, quote, neither super kinky nor bone straight. Advisory board member and film producer / director of the Atlanta Third World film, Cheryl Chisholm, said, "We thought we did a really good job selecting hair that was black hair and with which little girls could play with." As you can see here, I have my Addy doll's hair done. I think these are called rope braids. I was kind of being experimental, but her hair is quite easy to maintain. I actually think that it maintains itself a lot better than some of my white doll's hair, just because I can leave her hair in styles for a little bit longer sometimes. As for the use of the N-word in Addy's series, the board had finally removed the N-word from the series due to concerns over becoming a banned book. The board wanted the books to be a resource for adults and children across all races to prompt productive conversations over racial inequality, slavery, and Black history. Violet Harris wanted to ensure that Addy books could lead those discussions in a fashion that could be both honest and empathetic. Porter said of the inclusion of the N-word, "I thought it belonged in the book, had put it in the book, was convinced it belonged in the book." Ultimately, it wasn't implicit bias from Pleasant Company, but the thoughtful conversations of the advisory board that convinced Porter to demonstrate racist dynamics through other language. This, though, is why it was also important for the illustrations to convey not only joy, but suffering, because it was not expressed as much in the language. Because remember, if this book is taking place in 1864, do you think that it would be completely timely for people to solely be addressing the black characters as black or African American? No, the N-word likely would have been used at the time. Because it was not used and the language was changed for the book, it is important for that weightiness to be portrayed through the illustrations. Though painful, addressing racism in this way is imperative if the story was to be used as an educational tool addressing the weight of racial inequality. Along with the text and illustrations, clothing plays a role in Addy's introduction to freedom throughout the books. According to Corey Tide in the article Nothing But Each Other and Hope, Addy and the Black Feminist Tradition, which was published in the American Girl Anthology, which is an incredible book and resource, Pleasant Company encouraged authors to describe multiple outfits for their protagonists so that the company could sell more doll accessories. Porter, however, knew that an impoverished black child in this era would lack many clothes, especially the kinds of dresses that a 1990s child might beg a parent to purchase. She, meaning Miss Porter, found a creative way to meet the demand without undermining the story's historical plausibility. So as I mentioned before with the 6-book arc, the books would be released and then there would be outfits and products that were related to the books. That means that the authors of the American Girl series had kind of a unique job. When they were writing, they were meant to keep in mind writing in products, essentially products and clothing that could be marketable to children. Addy's story is described on the back cover of my copy of Meet Addy as one of great courage and love of family and love of freedom. The themes in this book are not only love and freedom, but of true liberation. Abigail C. Fine in her chapter, Breeches, Silks, and Flowered Hats, also from an American Girl anthology, writes, Clothing then represents a site of class comparison. Addy learns that freedom does not mean equality for all, but the book suggests that Addy's desire should be the reader's desire. Freedom should mean equality and quality for everyone. Addy's pursuit for not just equality, but quality is apparent throughout her series. And with that, we are going to go ahead and get into the actual series itself. And we are going to start breaking down the plot of the books, and then I am going to go ahead and do a little bit of explain a little bit of my own research. I've already done the research, so I think that I just want to go over what actually happens in the story, and then at the end I will go through sort of my historical fact checks, and then also just my other concluding thoughts. In Meet Addy, we learn that Addy is a 9-year-old girl enslaved on a Virginia plantation with her mama, papa, 16-year-old brother Sam, and her baby sister Esther. She has a very close relationship with an older enslaved couple whom she calls Uncle Solomon and Aunt Lula. It is unclear if they are her blood aunt and uncle, but later in their series, their last name is shown to be Morgan, while Addy's surname is Walker. It seems that maybe they're called aunt and uncle out of a deep respect and bond, rather than actually being blood relatives. This is a testament to the Walkers' close relationship with Aunt Lula and Uncle Solomon. Blood or not, they are family. We start our series on a warm summer night in 1864, and Addy is lying awake in bed when she hears her parents whispering. She feels her sister's hot breath on her face, and she hears her father say to her mother that a neighboring plantation owner, Master Gifford, has started selling enslaved people due to wartime financial struggle. Mama says that Master Stevens would never sell them because they work too hard. Later in Meet Addy, she will say that Papa and herself have lived and worked on Master Stevens' farm for their entire lives. So she is under the assumption that this is their home, that he would not get rid of them or sell them because they work too hard. They have concreted themselves as a necessity on this plantation. Papa whispers to Mama that Uncle Solomon has told him about a safe house. A house with red shutters about 10 miles after the river near the Gifford place, so a neighboring plantation, followed north until the railroad crosses with another set of tracks. An abolitionist named Miss Caroline lives in the White House, and she helps enslaved people arrange rides to freedom. This is the first time that Addy's parents have seemed to discuss running from the plantation, or at least the first time that Addy has heard them discuss it. Her older brother has previously tried escaping the plantation, but he was found and publicly whipped. At the time, Addy was disturbed that her parents didn't cry during Sam's whipping. The night of the whipping, Addy told her parents she was upset that they hadn't cried. Papa told Addy that he and Mama were crying on the inside, but they weren't always free to show their feelings on the outside. Papa tells Addy that on the inside we are free. Papa says, "There's always freedom inside your head." Addy knows that this safe house is a secret she can't risk talking to anyone about, including asking Sam or her parents about it. The next day, Addy is serving Master Stevens and a guest in the main house. The food smells good to Addy, who typically only has cornmeal mush for both breakfast and dinner. As she serves the men water, Addy overhears Master Stevens and the guest discussing the idea of selling Papa and her brother Sam together. The man leers at Addy and wants to purchase her too. He tells Master Stevens, "You got that one trained real good. She seems like a smart one." Master Stevens replies, "I got them all trained real good." Addy is shaken up and spills some water. The men laugh and joke that the spilling is evidence that she is still too young to be sold. They don't acknowledge the fact that she's probably shaky because they're discussing selling herself and her family like property. Instead, she's just a clumsy 9-year-old, and so that's why she's not ready to be sold. Addy finishes what she's doing in the house and runs to the field to warn Papa and Sam. She doesn't make it before the men. She sees her family being taken and begs Master Stevens not to split up the family. 9-year-old Addy is then whipped. About a week after Papa and Sam are forcibly taken from their family and sold like property, Addy is distracted with her work on the plantation. She is worming, meaning she is deworming or getting rid of the worms on the tobacco plants. Because she's distracted in her work, the overseer forces her to eat the worms that she missed. And we're given kind of this really graphic description of Addy having to chew juicy worms. She has to chew and swallow them. And this is an example of, because Ms. Porter was limited in some of the things she was allowed to write, she did have to show the real weight of slavery and racial inequality through scenes like this. She needs to show the violence against Addy. That night, Mama tells Addy that they're going to be leaving the plantation the very next night, and they are escaping to freedom. Mama explains that Auntie Lula and Uncle Solomon are too old to go on the journey with them, and Esther is too young. Addy is understandably very shaken up by this, and she tries to beg her mama to take Esther with her, and she promises that she will keep her quiet, but Mama says that it is just not a risk that they can take, even though she loves Esther just as much as she loves Addy. As they lie in bed that night, Addy and Mama cry and hold each other, and they hold Esther, and they have their last night in bed together as a family. The next night is the night of their escape, and the family is saying goodbye to one another. Uncle Solomon gives Addy a half-dime and tells her that freedom's got its cost. Addy gives her doll Janie to her baby sister Esther. Uncle Solomon advises Mama and Addy to go through as much water as possible to avoid dogs catching their scent and bringing them back to the plantation. They then leave the plantation and set out on their journey to freedom. There's a full moon in the sky. Author Connie Porter, the original illustrator Melody Rosales, and the Addy Developmental Advisory Board had collaborated to ensure the detail of a full moon on an August night in 1864 would be historically accurate. I found that detail to show a true love and care for the design of Addy. Canonically, we could pinpoint Addy's first night in freedom to Wednesday, August 17th, 1864, under a full moon in Pisces. They start that first night of the journey on foot because they will need to travel in the dark and sleep during the day. When the light comes and they must stop in a hiding spot, Mama gives Addy a cowrie shell that belonged to her great-grandmother, a duke. Papa's grandmother had been stolen from Africa, and she brought the shell with her. Here you can see a little vignette of the necklace. Addy's mama tells her, meaning a duke's, journey ended in slavery. Yours will end in freedom. Mama also pulls out a shoelace belonging to Sam. She ties Sam's shoelace through a duke's cowrie shell, creating a necklace and family heirloom for Addy. The second night of the escape, they are crossing the river near the Gifford plantation, where Mama almost drowns and is saved by Addy. They continue the journey until they find the railroad tracks, where they sleep and hide for the day. It is now the third night. Addy sees a lantern, and believing it to be a light from Miss Carolyn's safe house, she runs from Mama excitedly, thinking she's running towards the house. She runs straight up to a Confederate camp of sleeping soldiers. A soldier hears Addy and yells out to her, and he mistakes her for their enslaved errand boy. She plays along and gets the soldier water. After he drinks, she pretends to lie down and sleep until she is sure that the soldier has fallen asleep. Finally, Addy rejoins Mama, who was watching Addy from the woods and waiting for her. They walk until they finally reach the white house with red shutters, Miss Caroline's house. Addy approaches the door and knocks, and Miss Caroline answers, but she also thinks that Addy is the soldier's enslaved boy, and she tries to send her away, saying that she is not going to help the soldiers. After revealing themselves, however, Miss Caroline welcomes Addy and Mama and shares that she and Solomon were both children on farms next to each other growing up. She serves Addy and Mama rice and boiled greens, hardly Addy's daily plantation meal of cornmeal mush. Miss Caroline gives Addy and Mama new clothes, including the pink dress, known now as the meat dress. The Addy doll was debuted in this dress, and thus Mama and Addy embark on their life of freedom in Philadelphia. And here is a vignette of the meat outfit given to Addy. And I really like that the first outfit that we get to meet Addy in, or at least her doll, is in this pink dress, and this is really her first dress that she has in freedom. Originally, when we start the series, she does not have the pink dress because she does not have the pink dress until she is off of the plantation. And I don't know why, but I think something about it is really sweet that the outfit that she's debuted in is her first freedom outfit. Although this outfit is pretty cute. Look at that little dress. I'm guessing Mama made that because we know that she is a seamstress on the plantation. And that pretty much sums up everything that happens in the first book, Meet Addy. We then have the looking back / peek into the past section. All of these sections are different for each book, but this one focuses on how enslaved people and Black Americans preserve their culture. Enslaved people and Black Americans developed their own art, music, religious beliefs, and stories based on African traditions. This culture greatly influenced and continues to influence American culture to this day. The United States owes so much respect to Black culture for what Black people have contributed to American culture. This even comes down to our vocabulary. The words yam, canoe, and banjo come from West African or Edekiri languages. The looking back section also touches on spirituals, which are religious folk songs based on African music styles. So as for Meet Addy's accuracy and concluding thoughts, I actually looked into Addy's name, a duke, so technically Addy is short for a duke, although in the books it's not clear if her full name is a duke or if she's just named Addy after a duke, but either way she is named after her great-grandmother, a duke. A duke is a name coming from Yorubian origin, meaning much loved. The Yorubian people are a West African culture and one of Africa's largest ethnic groups. They inhabit primarily Nigeria, Benin, and Togo. Yoruba is still spoken today and is considered an Edekiri language, meaning an African language cluster. Addy's character was the first whose conception was overlooked by an advisory board. So before Addy, Felicity, Molly, Samantha, and Kirsten did not feature an advisory board to work on their collection. But this advisory board was created to ensure historical accuracy. Pleasant Company devised an advisory board consisting of the founding director of the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture and several historians and scholars on the topic of slavery. The advisory board included Lonnie Bunch, the founding director of the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture, Spencer Crew Robinson, professor of African American and Public History at George and former curator of the Smithsonian, Janet Sims Wood, former librarian and scholar at Howard University who specialized in the stories of Black women, Violet Harris, who we already mentioned, she is the researcher and expert on multicultural literature specializing in Black American children's literature, Wilma King, historian and expert on American slavery, June Powell, former expert of the National Afro-American Museum and Cultural Center in Ohio. This was the first advisory board American Girl had seen for the development of a doll, like I mentioned. Addy was in development for roughly 3 years, from 1990 to 1993, until her release in September of 1993. It is this very advisory board who are responsible for planting the seed of the eventual addition of Cecile, Melody, and Claudie. While tossing around ideas for the best way to introduce a Black character to the American Girl line, the board came up with various ideas for characters. These stories that were scrapped for Addy ultimately became the succeeding 3 Black historical characters. Cecile Ray represents a pre-Civil War free Black girl in 1850s New Orleans. So she exists about 10 years before Addy, but she is a free girl despite being a Black 9-year-old girl in the South. Melody is a girl experiencing the civil rights movement of the 1960s, and Claudie comes from 1920s Harlem Renaissance times. As of May 2026, the only historical Black characters released by American Girl include, in release order, Addy, Cecile, Melody, and Claudie. Addy's story was ultimately chosen to be told first because the board felt the story of slavery in America was inexorable from the story of Black people in America. This notion has, at times, caused controversy. The idea that a doll representing a Black little girl is up for purchase from a predominantly white market. Pleasant Rowland herself said in a November 1994 article, "We could have pushed the diversity button sooner. And if I got hit by a truck tomorrow, I would die knowing we made toy history. We made a Black doll an object of status and desire for white children." Quoting again Nothing But Each Other and Hope from the American Girl Anthology, Carrie Tide writes, "The problems with the Addy doll are nothing new. White desire for possessing black people, or sublimated their images, is fundamental to racial capitalism. Pleasant Company merely capitalized upon the 1990s multicultural moment to frame their doll as a contribution to social justice. The doll made Pleasant Company far more money than the books, and although it was also marketed to black families, the doll appears to have been primarily produced for white consumption." Tide continues a paragraph later. "Addy's direct creators were primarily concerned with caring for black readers. In the context of his genre, this care was a radical political act, and it was founded in the black feminist tradition. I hope Addy's advisory board recognizes their place in history with the development of Addy's character, story, doll, and products. They were not only voicing a place in doll history, but history itself. A multi-million doll brand releasing a doll like Addy at this time is notable, not because it was a risk, but because of the way it places a footnote in the story of American girls. This is a brand that was curated as a place for preteen girls. It's hard to be, in the words of Britney Spears, not a girl, but not yet a woman. This is a company that was emphasizing the streamline not of flashy products, but of thoughtful ones. The dolls were meant to represent girls who were on the cusp of adolescence and of times of history. Each doll/character were created with intention. Addy's doll in 1993 was created with true intention. We are on to book 2 in the main 6 books of Addy series, and that is Addy Learns a Lesson. So it is now August 1864. It is the same summer that Mama and Addy had made it to Miss Caroline's safe house, and then they had made their way to Philadelphia from the North Carolina area where they are from. So the book doesn't really go into too much detail, but it describes them making their way to Miss Caroline's house at the end of Meet Addy, and then at the beginning of Addy Learns a Lesson, they are described as having taken a hot and crowded boat to Philadelphia, but it doesn't really explain, are they on the boat with other newly freed enslaved people, or what's really going on there? We don't know. So that is where we are. Mama and Addy have just docked in Philadelphia, and I'm so sorry, I tried to wear my glasses, but the ring light reflection was way too distracting, so my contacts are a little blurry. But Addy and Mama have just docked in Philadelphia, and immediately we see that Addy wants to learn how to read, because one of the very first things she says, if not the first thing in the book, is she says, "I wish I could read," as she looks around the port and she realizes she can't read. She doesn't know where to go whatsoever, until they are approached by a woman and her daughter, and they learn that they are Mabel Moore and her daughter Sarah. Let's go ahead and pull up their photo. Here is Addy's BFF, Sarah Moore, and there's Mrs. Moore as well. So Mabel Moore and her daughter Sarah Moore are from the Freedom Society of Trinity, and they eventually find Mama and Addy in the port and tell them that they have been assigned to help the pair get settled. Addy and Sarah discover they are the same age, so they're both 9 years old, and Addy learns that the Moore families were formerly enslaved in Virginia. Sarah tells Addy that their teacher, Miss Dunn, was a formerly enslaved woman from North Carolina, just like Addy. Miss Dunn even went to college. Addy can't believe that their teacher is black, and a black woman who went to college at that. So the first thing that Mabel Moore and Sarah Moore do is they bring Addy and Mama to the church where they eat a meal, and over the meal Mama tells Mrs. Moore that she is a seamstress, and so that's the work she would like to do, and Mrs. Moore says she knows the perfect person. She knows an abolitionist named Mrs. Ford, and Mrs. Ford is happy to employ black folks if they're willing to do the work. So right away they already have a job lined up, so they have a place to stay. So they find employment with Mrs. Ford, but also lodging, because there is a simple tiny room above Mrs. Ford's shop called the garret. I think it's just kind of like an attic situation, and even though it's pretty dark and dreary, Addy is cheered to see that the room at least has a window. So she is happy to be in freedom, of course, but I think that she is also surprised that they're kind of being put into this tiny little attic, even though she is excited. So a week into Addie's life in Philadelphia, she is surprised at her initial dissatisfaction with life in Philadelphia, because back on the plantation, if she wasn't busy with her own chores, she could sit with Mama while she was doing seamstress work for the plantation. But here in Philadelphia, Mrs. Ford expects her to kind of not be around. It's a place of work. She doesn't really want children running around. And so Addie just feels really lonely. She's used to being around her family, Lula, or Auntie Lula, Uncle Solomon, Esther, Sam, Papa, the whole crew. But here in Philadelphia, she's kind of lonely because she doesn't have anyone to be with besides Sarah, because she can't really be with Mama while she works. She also doesn't really love that they live in a small, cramped room. It is described as being really smelly. It smells like soot and rotting garbage, and it smells fishy because they live near the harbor. 10 families share their privy, so there's an outdoor privy in the alleyway, and it is described as dark and filthy and probably pretty busy because it is shared by 10 families. So Addie, she's a bit lonely. But she does enjoy spending time with Sarah, who helps her own mother, who is a washerwoman. So Sarah gets to do errands for her, and she gets to run around some of the washing chores for her mama. And so Addie will join her on those deliveries. And they have about 2 weeks before school is going to begin. So on one of these errands trip, Addie sees her very first streetcar, and she asks Sarah, what kind of wagon is that? So she is clearly confused because she has never been in the city. She's only really spent her life directly on her little plantation. So she asks Sarah what kind of wagon is that, and Sarah informs her it's not a wagon, it's a streetcar. And this becomes kind of the first time that Addie realizes that even though she is free, meaning she's no longer enslaved, the limitations of racism do still bind her, because she is talking with Sarah about what kind of wagon is this. It's a streetcar. They talk about how people of color are unable to ride on the streetcars on the inside. So no matter the weather, they have to ride on the outside. And she is just really surprised that she would have to pay the same fare as white people, but not be allowed inside the streetcar no matter the weather. And they live in Philadelphia, where there is snow and rain. Addie seems genuinely confused that even though they're now free, they're still subjected to prejudice and racism. So this is Addie's first time realizing that, I think that it's her first time recognizing that racism is a thing. Of course she understands that because she was an enslaved little girl, but I think that they kind of hint towards, and I wonder how much more Connie Porter would have written it if it wasn't, of course, supposed to be just a short children's book. It'd be kind of interesting if you could see Addie's story from, like, written for adults but still from a child's point of view, just because I think it's really interesting how much more we could have dove into this concept of racism despite having freedom. So Addie discusses this concept with Mama that night at supper, and she bitterly says there aren't supposed to be things that Black people can't do. And this brings me back to the quote from American Girl Anthology, where Addie is expecting not just equality, but quality. So she shouldn't just be free. She should also have the same quality of life as her white compatriots. So Mama and Addie have now been in freedom for about 2 weeks, and it is the first day, before school. So before sunrise, Mama and Addie wake up. They do her hair, they freshly starch and iron her pink dress that she got over at Miss Caroline's. And Sarah had shown Addie that students will tell their pails apart by tying a ribbon around their pail. Not the wire, but the metal holder of the pail. And although I don't have a source for this, I think this is super true because I'm kind of addicted to, like, historical museums or preserved place type things, and I have definitely seen like preserved or example pails that have ribbons on it. So it is now Addie's first day of school. She arrives at the 6th Street School, which is a brick building near her church, Trinity Church. Addy finally meets her teacher, Miss Dunn, and she immediately makes Addy feel comfortable, and she shows Addy what her name looks like written on a slate. And it's the first time that Addy has ever seen her name written. And I think this is just such a special and such a beautiful moment that, of course, we probably all really take for granted the ability to read and write, and how special that is and how important access to education is. And I really like how Addy's story dives into that. So Addy then writes her name next to Miss Dunn's writing of her name, and Sarah is also really encouraging and says, Addy, I can read that plain as day. And it's just so cute. They're being so encouraging. I love it. So that first day of school, Addy and Sarah sit together near the back of the classroom. But the next morning when they show up at school, they notice that the seats are kind of rearranged, and Miss Dunn announces that they're going to be assigned seating. And she places Addy next to Harriet. So Harriet is her classmate who is described as well-to-do, I believe. With Harriet, it does seem like Connie Porter and the American Girl Advisory Board were trying to dive into colorism within the Black community a little bit, but I think that they kind of explored it more in a classism way. You'll definitely see what I mean more over time. So here is Addy, and here is Harriet, and she has lighter features, and that was intentional. We've been told by Connie Porter and Melody Rosales that was intentional, so I think that they were trying to explore that aspect a little bit, but maybe both because of like the time constraints. Of course, it's a short book, you can't get into it too much. It's a children's series, and also just because they were simply afraid of not being marketable enough, is allegedly the impression that I get based off of all of my research I've done, which is a lot. So here are some gorgeous illustrations by the incredible Melody Rosales. So Addy is now sitting next to Harriet, and Harriet tells her, Miss Dunn put you next to me because I'm the smartest one in class. So at lunch, Sarah asks Addy how she feels about sitting with Harriet, and Addy is actually really excited. She seems to fawn over Harriet in her beautiful dress. She's dressed really nice. She seems like she has money. She seems like she has everything that Addy thought freedom would be and would mean for her. Sarah seems uncomfortable and says that Harriet doesn't keep poor girls as friends. So again, it seems like they're not really diving into the colorism aspect, which we don't know if that is why Harriet may or may not choose Addy or treat Addy poorly, but they are diving into the classism. So Addy seems uncomfortable, and she says that Harriet doesn't keep poor girls as friends. She tries to make them her slaves. I find it interesting that as an actually formally enslaved person, Sarah would use this wording. We also learn that Sarah has only been free from slavery for a short time because she tells Addy, she, meaning Harriet, she's gonna hurt you just like she hurt me last year. So implying that Sarah had only kind of made her way into freedom herself just last year and was treated poorly by Harriet at the time. Over the following weeks, Addy is described as continuing a fascination with Harriet, her beautiful dresses, and how easily school seems to come to her. However, Harriet seems annoyed when Addy asks her questions, so Addy learns to save her questions for Sarah. So Addy is settling into school and her life in Philadelphia, and she takes her first spelling test, and she gets an 8 out of 20, and she is really discouraged by this because she goes, oh, I got 12 wrong. But Miss Dunn encourages her and says, but look how many you got right. You got 8 of them. And so I really love that Miss Dunn has this growth mindset. I think that's awesome. But Addy is embarrassed because Miss Dunn approaches her, and in front of her seatmate, aka Harriet, Miss Dunn says, maybe your mother can help you at home. And Addy is too embarrassed, especially in front of Harriet, to say, well, actually, my own mother can't read and write, so she cannot help me with this at home. So Addy is just kind of like, yeah, I guess she can help me at home. So on the walk home that day, Addy and Sarah are discussing the test, and Addy laments her test score, saying she feels like she is never going to catch up, but Sarah tells her it's never too late.
So Sarah drops off Addy at home, and she finds Mama crying. So part of Mama's job as a seamstress is she needs to deliver the packages, just like Sarah's mother has to deliver her packages as a washerwoman. Addy's mama needs to deliver her packages to clients who are buying her outfit she's making as a seamstress. So Mama's crying because she can't read the addresses that are written on the packages, but she doesn't dare tell Mrs. Ford that she can't read because she doesn't want to be fired by Mrs. Ford. So Addy says, you know what, Mama, I've just started school. I'm learning how to read. I just got an 8 out of 20 on this test. I got this. I am going to, whoa. I'm gonna do this. And she decides to ask Sarah to help because Sarah can read pretty well and she knows her way all around Philadelphia. She's pretty comfortable. She's been there for, it sounds like, about a year. So Addy runs ahead. She catches up with Sarah. She discusses the dilemma with Sarah, and so they go back, they grab the packages, and they are able to successfully deliver that first day's worth of packages. And Mama's ecstatic that the packages were delivered. She's so grateful to the girls. However, she is worried about how they're going to sustain this. And Addy says, I'm going to help you. Sarah agrees, we are going to do this for you. So Mama's eyes catch on Addy's cowrie shell necklace around her neck, and it seems like she's reminded in that moment of the trials and tribulations that their family has already been through, and she says out loud to Addy, you know what, our family has been through worse, we can do this. And she agrees that if Addy is helping teach her, meaning Mama, how to learn to read and write, then it will also help Addy with her learning. So they're in this together. They're both going to learn how to read and write, and they're going to deliver these packages. So Addy begins teaching Mama at home what she's learning during the day at school. And we have a really pretty illustration I just love that I'm going to show while I'm talking about this. And Addy and Mama start forming letters with scraps of leftover dough as they bake. And Mama loves to spell Sam, Papa, and Esther because she says seeing their names helps her feel closer to them. Let's see if there's some pictures back at school. So back at school, Addy kind of continues this fascination with Harriet, but Sarah doesn't like to hear about Harriet. So Addy and Sarah each only have one dress to wear day to day, but Harriet has a new one every single day, and Addy figures that Harriet must have 10 or 15 dresses. So just like I said before, Connie Porter writes, Harriet had everything that Addy had dreamed freedom would bring her. So one day late in October, Addy is walking with Sarah, and they are walking behind Harriet's group of friends on the walk home from school. And Addy says, hey, let's go catch up to Harriet's group. And Sarah says, no, I wouldn't walk with them. So then Harriet hears this. She turns around and goes, well, you couldn't walk with us anyways because we wouldn't let you walk with us, Sarah. And then she says to Addy, basically, Sarah's not your boss, Addy. You can walk with us anytime. And then Harriet and her group of friends disappear around the corner, and Sarah drops Addy off at home like usual. And at home, Mama is making her supper of biscuits and black-eyed peas. She tells Addy that she's been wanting to learn the word family, so they spell it with the biscuit dough, and I just love this picture here. The vignette is so cute. So she asks Mama what she thinks Esther's doing and when they'll be together like a real family. And Mama does not like this wording. She says she doesn't want Addy thinking they aren't a real family because they aren't all in one place. And so they both finish spelling family in the dough. So back at school, Addy's class is discussing the ongoing war and talking about the Union soldiers and how to support them. And it is announced to the class that they are going to be sending off black troops at the Baltimore depot that afternoon. They're going to be seeing the troops off. And Sarah asks why there even needs to be a war at all. And Miss Dunn tells the class that sometimes people have to fight even if they don't want to because they have to fight for what is right. And then Harriet, of course, has to get in there, and she talks about how Sarah should be glad that there's a war because she herself would be enslaved if there was not a war, essentially. And then Harriet proudly proclaims that her family has never been enslaved, they have always been free. And so I think this is really going back into the kind of inter-community prejudices that were existing at the time, and I really like how they explored this in an age-appropriate way. So Harriet is proudly proclaiming that she has never been enslaved, and Miss Dunn tells the class that most of their families would have been enslaved, even if they themselves were not enslaved. Even if their parents and grandparents were not enslaved, they probably would have gotten there because they were at some point enslaved. And this is probably why the advisory board decided to go with Addy's story before Melody's, before Cecile's, because this is really the story of Black history and Black culture in the United States. Is Black people were not initially here of their own volition, you know, they were not colonizing the United States, they were brought in and forcibly made to work and live in the United States. And so Miss Dunn kind of lightly brings that up and says that, Harriet, we're not drawing lines between who has been enslaved and who is not. This chapter again made me wonder how much further Connie Porter, Melody Rosales, and the advisory board might have wanted to explore prejudice within the Black community, because this kind of division within oppressed groups is noted historically within the LGBTQ plus community. If you're part of the queer community, it's definitely not common for kind of elder queers to be confused by things like the trans community. We see this with the Shia versus the Shite. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. We see this with Protestants versus Catholics and so much more. So the chapter is literally entitled, "The Lines Are Drawn." According to the article Addy, an American Girl Deep Dive, published in 2021, it was very important to Melody Rosales to depict colorism within the Addy series. The illustrations in the original 3 books, done by Rosales, can contrast against Bradford Brown's illustrations in the following 3 as starker, grimmer, yet exquisite in its detail. For example, in this scene of Mama and Addy writing their family member's name in dough, the details explore the grungy, dark aspects of Addy's life in Philly through the background. The walls to her room above Miss Ford's shops are peeling. Brown's work is beautiful, but Rosales details her Addy illustrations more grimly and intricately. But back to Addy Learns a Lesson. Addy and her class are on the way to send off the soldiers at the depot. While the class was leaving to walk to the depot from school, Harriet asks Addy if she wants to walk home with her after the depot visit, and she mockingly asks Addy if she needs to ask Sarah's permission first. Addy says that she will be joining Harriet later, even though she knows that this is a conversation she has to have with Sarah first. So at the depot, Addy notices that some people are clapping and cheering, but some people are crying and emotional, and it seems to set into Addy that the soldiers aren't here for a parade, they're heading off to war. Addy sees a soldier who looks like Sam, and she feels like crying herself. Addy turns to Harriet beside her and opens up. "My brother wanted to fight in the war." Harriet tells Addy that her uncle is serving with the 3rd Infantry, the 1st Black regiment organized in the state. Addy feels jealous that Harriet knows exactly where her uncle is. She wishes that she knew where Sam was and if he ever became a soldier. According to the History Press and Penn State Press, the 3rd Regiment recruited mainly in Philadelphia. The regiment began operation in 1861 and took part in operations with the Army of the Potomac, the Gaines Mill Battle, and more before joining the Army of Virginia in 1862. The regiment remained active through the duration of the war. June 17, 1864, in Philly, the recruits and veterans of the 3rd Regiment were consolidated into a battalion and transferred to the 54th Pennsylvania Infantry. So after the depot visit, Addy goes and tells Sarah that she's going to be walking home with Harriet, and Sarah seems hurt, and Addy seems like she's going to say more, but then Harriet calls her over, so she runs over to walk home with her and her friends. And so Addy, Harriet, and Harriet's group of friends are walking home, and they all start piling their books on top of Addy's books. And she says, wait, why do I have to carry all the books? And they tell her it's because she is their flunky. So since she's the new girl to the group, she has to be their flunky and basically do whatever they say. So she's carrying all their books, and they're discussing the upcoming spelling bee, which is going to be a 75-word test. they tell Addy that she has her own test to take, and basically she has to be the flunky, and being the flunky is their test to see if she can be a part of the friend group. So they drop her off at home, and she sees Mama and Mrs. Ford in the shop, and she asks if she can study for the spelling bee with Harriet. And Mama says, well, only if Sarah goes too. And speaking of Sarah, Mrs. Ford says, where is your friend? So Addy feels ashamed, and she just tells Mama that Sarah didn't want to walk with her that day, doesn't really go into it any further, and she kind of thinks to herself, I'm just going to find a way to hang out with Harriet, even if Sarah can't be there. I know Sarah's not going to go, and so I'm just going to find out a way to go anyways. So back at school the next day, Addy approaches Sarah and asks if she's angry, and Sarah says she's not. So Addy's like, yay, I'm gonna go sit with Harriet and tell her that I can hang out with her now. So Sarah goes over to Harriet and says, yay, I can study with you, and says that her mom said yes. So she's kind of telling a half-truth. Mama did say yes, but only if Sarah could go. Addy decides, this is kind of my loophole. I just simply don't bring that part up and say, Mama said yes. So that's what she tells Harriet. And so she is walking home with her that day, and the crew start making fun of Sarah, and they laugh about how she was wearing a wrinkly dress that day and how she only has one dress, even though her mother is a washerwoman. And so Addy tries to stand up for Sarah and says that, well, Sarah's mother works really hard. And the girls just say, well, you know what, Addy, I think you're good enough to be our flunky because you look clean. Your mama takes care of you, even if you only have one dress. And they tell her that she looks good enough to be their flunky. So they stop to drop Addy off, and Addy says, oh, you don't have to drop me off. I can keep going with you and study. And Harriet says, you can maybe come over sometime, but not today. And Addy goes, well, the spelling bee is tomorrow. And Addy's like, Harriet's like, right, bye. So they take their books off of Addy's pile because, again, she's carrying all of the books for everybody, and they go off. So Addy goes up to the garret that she shares with her mama, and she is so ashamed of herself. She is thankful that she's all alone because she throws herself onto the bed and she sobs, and she just feels disgusted with herself because when she met Harriet, Sarah warned her that they would try to make her their slave, and she feels ashamed that not only had Harriet chosen to make her a slave, but she had chosen to be her slave. She had escaped from slavery, and yet she had chosen to do someone else's bidding. So here are the girls, and there is Addy struggling to carry their things. The next morning, Addy wakes to find a new outfit laid out for her. Mama had created the outfit with leftover cloth from Mrs. Ford's shop and had been secretly working at night for weeks to surprise Addy with a new outfit. Mama says she wanted Addy to look her best for the spelling match, and she tells Addy that no matter how well she does in the bee, she will be proud of Addy because Addy worked hard. Like Harriet in the beginning of the story, Addy too now owns a beautiful blue outfit. So that morning at school before the bee, Addy is just feeling straight up nervous and queasy, but during the bee, she is actually doing really well. And here is her beautiful outfit. We're gonna talk about it a little bit more during my concluding thoughts part, but here's the gorgeous outfit by American Girl. Oh, she has a hair. So I'm probably just gonna kind of hold this up for a close-up while I talk here. In the middle of the bee, Harriet leans over to tell Addy that if she wins, she's going to invite 5 friends over for ice cream, and Addy might be one of the friends who are invited over to celebrate. Sarah is out of the bee on the word account, and Harriet calls Sarah dumb. So Addy feels a flash of anger and thinks to herself that she is going to show Harriet. She is beginning to idolize Harriet less and less the more that she sees of her as a person. So the bee is down to the last 2 spellers, which, who would have guessed, it is Addy and Harriet. So Harriet is given the word principle, as in your principles, your morals that you have, and yeah, she spells it incorrectly, and she is out, and Addy steps up and she spells principle correctly, and she is given the medal. and her friends are congratulating her, and she has a friend tell her that she loves her new outfit. And I just love this quote from Abigail C. Fine in the American Girl Anthology. Although ostensibly the novel carries the message that fancy clothing means little without a kind heart, Addy does feel more confident and intelligent in her new outfit. As the rest of the class goes to lunch, Addy is alone in the schoolhouse. Miss Dunn finds Addy and gives her a pep talk about friendship. Miss Dunn says she suspects lines have been drawn between the girls and the class, and Addy says, "I don't know how to get rid of the lines." Miss Dunn tells her, "You've learned a lesson about friendship. Think about what you stand for and act on it." Addy is then alone again in the schoolhouse, and she opens her tin to see that Mama packed her cookies spelling love. Addy hurries outside to find Sarah, and both girls apologize and say that they still want to be friends before sharing the love cookies. And I'm sure we have a little vignette in here. Oh, my eyes are getting dry. Here is, I believe this is one of the vignettes rather than a drawing by Melody Rosales. So this is a different illustrator. I'm not sure if it was Renee Graff at the time. Renee Graff might have done the vignettes on this one. And yep, Renee Graff and Jane S. Varda. So I just love this little vignette of the cookie spelling love made by Mama. Now let's go ahead and dive into the looking back / peek into the past section. So the focus of this looking back section of the book is on Black education at the time. So we talked about in Meet Addy how each peek into the past is different in Addy's series. It's not like the same few pages each one is different, and they kind of focus on different parts of the time period. So this one kind of focuses on Black education, and we learn in the 1830s it became against the law in many southern states to teach Black people to read and write. And even in free states, education for Black people was often poor due to segregation. Segregated schools often had minimal supplies. Patriotism and obedience to God and family were often important values in schools at this time, no matter the designated race of the school building. So both Black and white schools really push these beliefs, patriotism and obedience to God and family. These were huge themes around the Civil War era. In the northern states especially, the day often would have at least started or ended with a patriotic song, if not both. And a push for Black education increased as more and more freedmen flocked to schools in free states. Slapdash schools became common in churches and homes as sacrifices were made and people fought to help educate one another. My dog had to come say hi. So I am now going to move on to kind of my accuracy / concluding thoughts on all of Addy Learns a Lesson. So I dove a lot into reading about Philadelphia trolley history, and it was fascinating. So streetcars would have only been around for like 6 to 7 years, starting in 1858 in Philadelphia. And so at the time of Addy's story in 1864, they only would have been around for 6 or 7 years, and they would have been horse-drawn. So it makes sense why when she saw it, she would have asked Sarah, what kind of wagon is that? Because they were horse-drawn. So in light of the new transportation system, Philadelphia had been experiencing a public transportation segregation movement the year before her story begins in 1863. Camp William Penn outside of Philadelphia's border housed and trained soldiers who in turn used the Philadelphia trolley, as well as free Black men, women, and children simply going about their business in Philadelphia. So in 1865, the year after Addy's story, an elderly Black woman successfully sued a conductor for throwing her off of a streetcar and injuring her. In 1862, a few years before Addy's story takes place, Frederick Douglass said of Philadelphia, "Colored persons, no matter how well-dressed or well-behaved, ladies or gentlemen, rich or poor, are not even permitted on any of the main railways through that Christian city." Murray Dubin wrote in South Philadelphia, Mummer's Memories, and the Melrose Diner, "There were more Blacks in Philadelphia than in any other northern city, but no northern city treated them worse." In 1862, Frederick Douglass had gone on to state, "There is not perhaps anywhere to be found a city in which prejudice against color is more rampant than in Philadelphia." So that kind of sets the scene for the world that Addie is living in, and it makes perfect sense why one of the themes throughout the stories is that even though she is free, she continues to experience a lot of discrimination and prejudice, both from other Black people and from white people. So the Black community were able to go to school in Philadelphia starting in the 1820s. So that was a few years after the first public school district was opened and public schooling became funded for white Philadelphians. So that happened in 1818, and then in the 1820s, Black people were able to have their own education system in Philadelphia. So I was curious how true American Girl remained to the source material with the product line. So I do own the dress or the outfit that is associated with Addie Learns a Lesson. I don't own the lunch pail tin. I would like to, or the tin lunch pail. Just because I think it's really cute. So that was sold in 1993 through 2007, and it was tied with a green ribbon with white polka dots because that was what was illustrated in the book. We'll have to try to find the page that has her tin on it. But the collection was $18, and then at the time of its retirement, it was $20. So it wasn't bad. Throwback to the American Girl prices with like, oh, here's the picture. Or the vignette, so Renee Graff would have drawn this, but yeah, I am constantly researching American Girl, of course, just for fun, and just being really surprised at the prices of things. So the tin lunch pail was sold 1993 through 2007, tied with a green ribbon, just like in this illustration by Renee Graff. It came with a cloth napkin, a meat pie, a grape bunch, and the love cookies that came up at the end of the book, but I kind of lost my page on that one. From 2014 to 2017, a second lunch pail was sold without the green ribbon, but this was a red metal pail rather than the silver tin, so it wasn't even the canonical same item, and it did contain the same food items though, and that retailed for $28. So lunch sets currently sold on the American Girl website retail between $28 and $32. So as of right now, May 2026, yeah, the cheapest food item or lunchbox type thing you can get on the American Girl site is a Truly Me one for $28, and then Julie's lunchbox is currently being sold for $32 on the site. I just thought that was kind of interesting. So this outfit that I have right here is the school suit and blouse. This was sold 1993 through 2006 before its re-release in 2025, so that's when I purchased this. Its retail cost was originally $20 when it was sold 93 through 2006, and then at the time of its retirement, it was only $22. So that's what I'm saying. This outfit was once only $20, and then even though it was sold for like 20 years span, it was only $22 by the end of it. But when it was re-released in 2025, it was $55, so that's what I paid for this. But it features a beautiful Garibaldi blouse, which is a very period accurate blouse, and it would have been considered kind of like the gender neutral blouse of the time, which I found really interesting, and I think that it was kind of inspired by like military type suits. So here is the white Garibaldi blouse, which I'm not sure if you're watching or not, but the sleeves are slightly puffed. The front has kind of a ruffle all the way down. There is a bow around the throat. And so this Garibaldi blouse was very in fashion, and I really like that they included that. You can see her puff sleeves down here, or maybe you can't, but there are puff sleeves that kind of extend beyond the jacket sleeves. So the jacket that she's wearing on top is shorter, and I really love the detail of showing that it has multiple different cloths, which would have been both period accurate for someone of her economic standing, and also because Mama used backup cloth from Mrs. Ford's shop. So there is a different pattern on the inside versus the outside of the jacket, and I love that. And then it features this skirt, and both the skirt and the jacket are piped with just a black sort of a ribbon. It's not a ribbon exactly, but black detail. And then she is wearing the actual pin, and it is like a, what's the word, a functioning pin, so you can unpin it and take it off the blouse. It actually came separate, and then I put it on, not the blouse, but the jacket. And I think that it came with stockings, but I don't have her in those right now. I don't even have her in her own shoes, unfortunately. I think she's wearing Josefina's Christmas shoes, but here she is in all her glory. I absolutely love this outfit. It is stunning on her. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to Addy's Surprise, book 3. So this is the last book in the series that was originally illustrated by Melody Rosales before Bradford Brown go ahead and takes over for the next 3 books. So Addy wakes up one morning in the garret feeling cold, and Mama tells her that the window is stuck open, and so they have to go ahead and stuff it. So they're stuffing it together, and they're talking about how they can't light the stove for warmth because they need it to the coal to last them to cook for dinner. So really they can only afford to light the stove each night to cook, and they can't light it just to keep warm. So Addy is getting ready for school in the cold, and she puts on her boots, and they are still wet from the previous day because they can't have the stove lit to warm them up throughout the night, and so they have just been freezing overnight from the puddles that she stepped in the previous day. And so Addy and her mama, they are doing well. They are now a few months into freedom, or living in a free state. So it is December morning, and Addy looks over and sees an expensive dress laying on the table, and Mama has been staying up working hard on it, and it is a dress for a client who's known as being really particular, Mrs. Howell, and her daughter Isabella is to wear the dress to presumably a Christmas party because it's a Christmas themed dress. And Mama comments that it's been difficult to do her stitches at night because she has been working on the dress through the night, and they don't have a kerosene lamp because they can't really afford it right now, and so she has to do her stitching just by candlelight. And so they are saving their money in a milk bottle, and they currently have $1.75, and that includes both money that Mama makes as her job, or at her job as a seamstress, and then also the money that Addy makes in tips helping Mama. So in Addy Learns a Lesson, she started doing her deliveries. Oh, my dog's outside barking. Doing deliveries for Mama and Mrs. Ford. As Mama braids Addy's hair for school, they reminisce on their last Christmas at the plantation together, and Master Stevens apparently had given them what is described as a real skinny chicken. And Sam, if you remember, Sam had previously tried escaping from the plantation before Mama and Addy's escape, and he was very anti-Master Stevens. So when they had gotten the real skinny chicken, Sam had refused to eat any of it because he says that giving them a chicken at Christmas time doesn't make up for enslaving them year round. And he says it doesn't make it up for a whole year of work. They also discuss the family's favorite dish, which is Mama's sweet potato pudding. And here I actually have the bowl and the cast iron that you could purchase for Addy. And when it was originally sold, I believe it came with a sprig of holly and maybe a little recipe book as well. But here I just have a yellow ceramic bowl with white stripes, and then also a tiny little cast iron. It has 3 legs, so it's considered a spider leg cast iron, I believe, and then it has kind of like flecking on the sides. So they are discussing the dish that Mama makes, and she says that Auntie Lula had taught her to make it because if you also remember, Mama had grown up, her entire life she had spent on Master Stevens' plantation, and Auntie Lula presumably had kind of helped raise her. So they're talking about that and how they'll make the sweet potato pudding for Christmas dinner. And when they have the Christmas dinner, they'll be eating the same thing as Auntie Lula, Uncle Solomon, and baby Esther.
The night before, Addy had dreamed of the family all together in Philadelphia, and she recalls this dream to Mama, and she says, "Someday it ain't gonna be a dream." On the walk to school, Sarah is telling Addy about how lovely their church is for Christmas time. They put on this annual nativity play, which also my church growing up did the annual nativity. Although for Addy's church, it's a shadow play, which was a common form of entertaining children at the time, a shadow play. And in my church, you would walk around the little actors. I was an angel. I think I was an angel maybe 3 years. I was never Mary or anyone really important to the plot. Anyways, so Sarah is telling Addy about this nativity play, and she was really excited. And the congregants will act out the nativity story while the story is read aloud, and the church is decorated in pine branches and candles, and it just sounds lovely. The children's choir practices every single Saturday until Christmas to prepare for Christmas services, and Addy's best friend, Sarah, is in this choir. And Addy wants to go to choir practice, but she doesn't want to miss out on Sundays making deliveries, because remember, she wants to make tips delivering for Mrs. Ford so that they can buy the lamps so they have light for Mama to continue working by, and also just to make their lives easier in the evening. And so Sarah says that if Addy can't make it, she is going to teach her the songs for the Christmas play. That Saturday, Addy is running errands and making deliveries for Mrs. Ford when she stops into the dry goods store for thread, buttons, ribbon, and fringe. She passes Mr. Del Monte's secondhand shop where she had gotten her socks used, so she frequents the shop with her Mama looking for used goods, and she and Mama have also gotten some of their cookware at Mr. Del Monte's shop. Addy sees a scarf for 20 cents that she wants to buy for Mama. She asks Mr. Del Monte to put it aside for her, and he keeps it beside a rusty kettle. Addy decides she will save half of her delivery tip so that she can still save for the lamp and secretly get the scarf for Mama for Christmas. Here is a gorgeous illustration of Mr. Del Monte and Addy and the red scarf. At home, Addy is again met with the reality that despite being free, she spends less time with Mama here than at the plantation. As Mama works into the night downstairs, Addy counts her money in the garret. With the half-dime Uncle Solomon gave her the night of their escape to freedom, she now has 10 cents, halfway to buying the scarf. The next morning, Addy is in church in the women's section, so I guess her church splits up by men and women, and she sits with her Mama. And the service that morning is about one of the familiar themes in the Addy series, and it's freedom and its cost. There was a time when you came to freedom and you found out what freedom was about, Reverend Drake says. It wasn't free. You needed food to eat, clothes to wear, a place to stay. He encourages the congregation to put in a little extra to the collection boxes for the Freedmen's Fund. Addy is inspired, and she decides that she is going to help somebody. She and Mama decide to give their $1.50 of lamp money to the Freedmen's Fund because even though they need the lamp, the church had helped them when they had nothing. Addy decides she is going to continue secretly saving money for Mama's scarf, but will try to help people in other ways by going to the pier the next Saturday to help with the freedmen, just like Sarah and her mother had met Addy at the pier when she arrived in freedom in the summer. So Addy and Sarah arrive at the pier to help hand out supplies to newcomers, and Addy sees a woman and a baby, and she takes off her own shawl to warm the baby. This is the image that caused controversy between Melody Rosales and Pleasant Rowland. As Addy helps lead people to the church, the baby's mother tells Addy that they were just freed a month ago. Her plantation's owner had told all of the enslaved people that they were free and they needed to leave, but they had almost nothing. So this was common in the South after freedom was announced, so after the Emancipation Proclamation was declared. People would be turned free, but they had nothing. So, I mean, they weren't being paid on the plantations, and so they were given absolutely no money or supplies and were just told, get off the plantation, the place you've been your whole life, like in Mama and Dad, or Papa's case. Go on, you're free.
what does it matter that you have absolutely nothing? So the owner of the plantation that this woman had been on had done exactly that. They told everyone they're free and needed to leave, but they had nothing. So for a week, she and some others had walked to Baltimore and survived eating almost nothing but grass. So does this illustration seem like a woman who needs to be smiling? Suddenly, as Addy did her deliveries later that day to rich homes, fine clothes and fancy manners seemed really silly. Addy delivers the dress that she'd previously seen on the table back home at the garret, and she brings it to the Howells' house, a multi-story home with a dark wooden staircase, pink chairs and couches, and gas lamps covered by glass globes. The maid gives Addy a dime, the biggest tip she's ever gotten on a delivery. Addy races home and counts her tip money. She now has 40 cents, so she has enough money to put 20 cents in the milk jar and take 20 with her on her last errand. She plans to sharpen a pair of scissors for Mrs. Ford and then purchase the scarf for Mama. Addy sees the scarf still in the window tucked behind the tea kettle. A woman lifts a fussy baby out of its carriage, and it makes Addy think of the baby that she met earlier that day. She thinks of her baby sister Esther, who was still not yet in freedom. Addy turns from Mr. Del Monte's store and walks into the church. She finds the Freedman's Fun Box and one by one drops her 20 cents in. The last coin in her hand is the half-dime from Uncle Solomon. She thinks of him telling her that freedom's got a cost, and she drops the dime in. Addy arrives home where Mama and Mrs. Ford are working, and Addy moves to go upstairs to the garret, but Mrs. Ford tells Addy that she's been really helpful and she can practice needlework on a plain apron so that she can start sitting quietly with Mama and she doesn't need to just go right upstairs to the garret when she gets home. So this is really exciting for Addy, and it also is kind of a turning point in her relationship with Mrs. Ford, where she is accepting Addy as a helpful individual and she's not just an annoying kid. She is someone who is welcome to hang out with her and Mama, and she's kind of earned her place working in the shop with Mama. And so Mrs. Ford compliments Addy and says that she's served the business well, and I really appreciated this kind of gesture of affection from Mrs. Ford. So it is now 4 days before Christmas, and Addy is working in the shop where she has been able to stay ever since the day that Mrs. Ford gave her the needlework. And I think it's really cool because when they first arrived in Philadelphia, Addy had met Sarah, whose mother did work, and Addy could help Sarah while she helped her mother on her washerwoman chores. And now Addy gets to help her mother with her chores. And so Addy is in the warm shop, and so she's nice and cozy instead of up in the garret where it's freezing, and she is helping Mama and Mrs. Ford sort the buttons when suddenly Mrs. Howell walks in, and she brings back the dress that Addy had delivered. And I feel like it's really parabolic to see a young girl literally on her hands and knees working, and then in walks Mrs. Howell, who's fuming over a fancy dress made for a girl Addy's same age. And Mrs. Howell is dissatisfied with the dress because it is now too small. Mrs. Ford suggests that Isabella Howell, Mrs. Howell's daughter, may have grown since she was measured for the dress, but Mrs. Howell is furious, and Mrs. Ford declares, "Ruth Walker here is the best seamstress who has ever worked for me." And I think it's a really touching gesture that Mrs. Ford would stand up for Mama and says that she will give a refund, not because the work was insufficient, but because Mrs. Howell was dissatisfied. So this is really a pivotal moment for Addy feeling welcome in her new community, seeing that Mama's employer will stand up for her paid employee. On Christmas Eve, Addy gets home from running errands to find that the shop has closed early, but in the shop she runs into Mrs. Ford, who gives Addy the returned Howell Christmas dress, and she says that she altered it herself for Addy to have. And so she has Addy stand so that she can kind of hem up the bottom really quick, and Addy asks if she can keep the trim that had been cut off, and Mrs. Ford tells her, "All of this dress belongs to you." So it is now Christmas morning, and Addy wakes up and opens her gift from Mama, and it is a new rag doll, and Addy declares that she is just as beautiful as Janie, and she names her Ida Bean because she is a doll stuffed with beans. And despite growing up too fast, Addy is still experiencing girlhood, and she didn't forget about her old doll, so she is delighted to hug her lumpy doll stuffed with beans and name her Ida Bean. And Addy gives Mama a scarf that she had made out of the scraps of the dress.
So when Mrs. Ford cut off the scraps from the dress that Mrs. Howell had returned, Addy not only got her a brand new dress for herself, but she also was able to make a matching scarf for Mama. And Addy and Mama also make the sweet potato pudding for their Christmas church dinner, and they put some aside to have later back at home. So they take some to church and they leave some at home. Addy and Mama bring the pudding to the church, where Addy is awestruck by the beauty of the manger scene, the music of the organ and the choir, and the togetherness she felt. She was crying because the church was so beautiful and the choir sounded so good, and she and Mama were together. After the service, the congregation ate turkey and dressing, squash and greens, cornbread and applesauce. Addy had never seen so much food on her plate at one time. Back in Meet Addy, we saw Addy eating corn mush for both breakfast and dinner on the plantation. Now she's eating as a freed person who could read and write with a plate full of food in the fellowship hall of her beautiful church. After dinner, the shadow nativity for the children begins. As the star guides the wise men, the shadow nativity is broken up by the light coming from an open door. So, if Addy is sitting watching this shadow play, and the door opens, and there's a little sliver of light, and we see the shadow of someone walking in, who do we think it's going to be? But Papa. A person steps out of the shadows, and it is Papa, who asks, "Is that my Addy?" And so we get this beautiful scene of Addy just flinging herself into her Papa's arms, and she is finally back with him. So the reunited family goes back home after church, and I wish we got to see the scene of Mama seeing Papa, because she must have like fallen to her knees. This is her man. He's finally back from where? We don't know yet. He hasn't gone to tell them where exactly he ended up. So they're finally all back together, and they are walking home, and they're going to show Papa where they live. And they notice that there's a light in the windows they approach, and Mama comments that this is strange because they didn't leave a candle burning. So they open the door to the garret, and they find a brightly shining kerosene lamp, and it is gifted to them by Mrs. Ford. And the lamp shines as bright as the note from Mrs. Ford, "May the hope of the Christmas season shine in your lives always." And in kind of this echo back to Meet Addy, Papa cries because he is so happy. So he had previously told Addy that he isn't always free to show how he feels on the outside, but now he is in a state where he is literally considered free, and he feels free to wear his emotions for maybe the first time. Connie's Porter's excellent writing repeatedly brings us back to the theme of freedom and its cost, even without implicitly stating it. Mama pulls out the leftover sweet potato pudding they had put to the side, and Papa says, it's almost like you knew I was coming, and Mama tells him that they had never stopped hoping. So Papa is finally able to tell Addy and Mama what has happened since the last time they saw each other back in August, I believe. And so Papa and Sam had been separated the first day at their new plantation, and then 2 months later, all of the people left on the plantation had been freed. So Sam had been separated and he'd been taken somewhere new. Papa had stayed on the new plantation. 2 months later, he was freed. So it's kind of like the woman they met at the pier. It sounds like where they were kind of freed and just got told, "Go, you're done." So Papa made his way to Maryland, where a Freedmen's Society helped him get to Philadelphia. The Women's Association of Philadelphia for the Relief of the Freedmen was founded in 1862, so 2 years before Addy's story, and it was founded to assist freed or escaping enslaved people. Quaker men founded the Friends Association of Philadelphia and its vicinity for the relief of colored freedmen in 1863. So Addy likely would have gone through this organization as well, and she makes several references to Quaker assistance throughout the book series, and it sounds like this is also how Papa made his way back to Philadelphia. Back in the small home in Mrs. Ford's house on Christmas night, where Addy has just been reunited with her father, he pushes down the broken window and he tells them that he will make a new sash for it. Papa says, "It should be warmer in here now," and Addy says, "It already is," which is so special. And so then we dive into this book's peek into the past / looking back, and remember each book is a little bit different. So this one's peek into the past focuses on winter events at this time. Due to wartime financial insecurity, food and gifts were often simple and had to get creative. So people followed creative recipes, such as using ground chestnuts to make coffee, or I was gonna say diet coffee, but that's not true. Kind of a knockoff coffee.
or they made apple pies without apples. Freedom was not a one-and-done deal by the government for enslaved people. On January 1st, 1863, a year and a half before Addy's story begins, the Emancipation Proclamation was released. President Abraham Lincoln announced that all persons held as slaves in the rebellious southern states are, and henceforth, shall be free. The preliminary Emancipation Proclamation on September 22nd, 1862, 3.5 months prior, stated that slaves in those states still in rebellion as of January 1st, 1883 would be freed. So the South continued to rebel the Union, and 100 days after the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, the Emancipation Proclamation was issued. It's important to note that slavery was left untouched in the states that had legalist slavery that remained loyal to the Union. So the removal of slavery seems to me to have stood as a punishment to the rebellious South rather than as a quest to a better United States. Then this kind of gets us into the topic of the 13th Amendment, which officially states that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude may exist within the United States. This was passed by the Senate in April of 1864, and it was not fully passed through the House as Congress did not pass it when the Senate did. So before his death on April 15th of 1865, Abraham Lincoln had encouraged the House to pass the 13th Amendment in Congress, and it had been passed by the Senate an entire year prior to that. And so that's a really interesting example how historically when things that happen up in Washington are not in agreement, it can really slow down the process of progress in America. So on February 1st, 1865, President Abraham Lincoln approved the joint resolution of Congress submitting the proposed amendment to the state legislatures. And then finally, the necessary number of states, so 3/4, ratified the 13th Amendment on December 6th, 1865, months after Lincoln's assassination, and nearly 3 years following the Emancipation Proclamation. Kwanzaa, the celebration of Black history and culture taking place December 26th through January 1st, beginning the day after Christmas and ending on the anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation, was founded in 1966. So it's a relatively modern holiday, and this was founded by Dr. Maulana Karenga, and this celebrates 7 principles: Umoja, Kijichagula, Ujama, Ujima, Nia, and Kumba. So these represent unity, self-determination, collective work and responsibility, purpose, creativity, and faith. And then this gets us moving on to Addy's surprise, my kind of accuracy research, and concluding thoughts. So the sweet potato pudding plays a really important cultural and familial role in Addy's stories. And so I kind of dove into a sweet potato history from the Library of Congress, which is a really interesting article. And according to the 2010 article from the Library of Congress blog, a sweet potato pudding recipe was found in the very first published American cookbook, which was called American Cookery, authored by Amelia Simmons in 1796. Sweet potatoes are often intertwined in Black culture and history. Sweet potatoes were the closest things to yams that African people could get after forcibly crossing the Atlantic, according to an article by Brianna Lambeck. Lambeck writes, "It's a tasty symbol of our history, innovation, family, and most importantly, love." Lambeck continued later in the article, "Our food has always held deep communal love ties. With every bite, we honor our ancestors and elders' ingenuity. Sweet potatoes and yams are different vegetables from different plants. Though they can sometimes be interchangeable, true yams are starchier and less sweet." Remember, we learned in the Meet Addy Looking Back or Peek into the Past section that the word yam actually comes from Edekiri or West African languages. So in Meet Addy, a dress marks the commencement of Addy's life and freedom when she receives a pink dress from abolitionist Miss Caroline. In Addy Learns a Lesson, Addy receives a special blue school outfit made by Mama for her spelling bee. In Addy's surprise, Mama and Mrs. Ford technically collaborate to create Addy's Christmas dress. I had found Mrs. Ford's gifting of the dress remarkable and found my thoughts mirrored when I read Abigail C. Fine's Breeches, Silks, and Flowered Hats, and her comment on this moment is really special. Here, the literary garment intersects with race relations and operates as a metaphor. The dress was originally made by Addy's mother, a Black woman, for a white girl. The dress was then returned in anger. Mrs. Ford, another white woman, takes that anger, neutralizes it, and reshapes it into a beautiful gift for Addy. The book does not make explicit the return of the dress are racially motivated, but metaphorically, the gown operates as a complex piece of interplay between parties of different races, ending as a beacon of hope for racial understanding. Addy's dress was made by her mother and Mrs. Ford, working together to bring joy to a child. Although the Addy doll and her books have a complicated legacy, especially in light of the Black Lives Matter movement and current conversation of race in the United States. In 1993, Addy's novels were some of the first mainstream books for children to open a conversation on race. And that concludes part 1 of my Addy deep dive. So I went over Meet Addy, Addy learns a lesson, and Addy's surprise. So thank you so much for tuning into this very special video. I am very excited to complete it, edit it, go ahead and see everyone's thoughts. Definitely comment your thoughts below. I am really interested in, I really hope that people enjoyed this because I have been super excited to go into an actual deep dive rather than mostly just showing off my dolls and products. That's kind of the turn I want to take with this channel, is going a little more into like deep dive, a little more into the American Girl literature instead of only the products from American Girl. So yeah, thank you so much for paying attention if you stuck around this long, and I will see you next time. Bye! Check out Dolls on Skates on Instagram.